as we know, the stages of heart failure, the stage D is what represent the advanced stage or end stage of heart failure. And these are the patients that, in spite of a very optimal medical therapy, they continue to be severely symptomatic. And these are the patients, I think these are some of the options to help them. Most of these patients, I mean, they are in class 4 or maybe class 3B situation, and is Intermex registry. So they mostly belong to the class 4 NYHA class or maybe class 3B, but we also have the Intermec registry, which also I think helps you that they are in the advanced failure profile, like 1 to 7 profile of Intermec registry. You have one which is the most sick ones, cardiogenic shock, and then those patients who are dependent on anatropes, they are not sort of improving, rather deteriorating. So these are the subset of patients. I think we need options to go for sort of these kind of. Now, as far as once we have exhausted our medical therapy, then comes there are a few more therapy that we can try in some of these patients, whether it's like the CRT in some individuals, which might help those with a broad QRS, left bundle branch block, or now we have a conduction system pacing, or some patient who may have tachyarrhythmias. Ablation therapy might treat these arrhythmias and improve LV function, or of course surgical or interventional intervention for patients who need these kind of things, which might help the heart failure. But I think once we are exhausted and then we know that these are patients who are not really improving, these are the group of patients which need further mechanical circulatory support or cardiac transplant. We need that over the period of time, the heart failure has become like an epidemic, it's a huge load, and there's an increased incidence of the death also over the years because of the progressive heart failure and patients deteriorating further. Even if we look at the hospitalization, I think repeated hospitalization only shows that the patients are more sicker and they land up into the high mortality. And these are the kind of patients, and I think then once we decide which are the patients which need to be thought for mechanical support, like the European Society Cardiology criteria, patient more than 2 months of severe symptoms despite optimal medical and device therapy, and more than one of the following: very low ejection fraction, repeated hospitalization more than 3 in 12 months, and dependence on IV anotropic therapy, progressive organ dysfunctioning occurring. These are the individual, I think, they seriously should be thought that this is the kind of therapy which might help these individuals. As far as there can be acute mechanical support, acute way when you have a patient sort of very deteriorating, that acutely maybe bridge to recovery, maybe bridge to decision, bridge to bridge, and these are the kind of mechanical support that are available to us today to help these patients: aortic balloon, ECMO, Centrimag, tandem heart, Impella. We may stabilize the patient, and so for some time that you can take a major decision whether long term, but where he has to go, whether he go for a transplant or he has to go for a sort of a chronic help or LBRED therapy, like which can be bridge to recovery, bridge to transplantation, or bridge to candidacy, or destination therapy. And I think LBRED has gone through the last 25 years or so, there has been significant innovation advances to improve upon these devices. And I think the first device which came, HeartMate 1, this was around late 90s. And I think it was a very bulky device. And there was also issue of complication like thrombotic issues, infection, and even the patients, thin patient could not, because you have to have enough space to put these devices. But of course, then we had a HeartMate 2, and the major advance came with that flow which was pulsatile in the HeartMate 1 was now continuous flow, axial flow, or centrifugal pump, and then we have the further innovation into HeartMate 3, which took care of some of the limitation which the HeartMate 2 had presented. So these are the kind of number of patients who have, I think, more than 22,000 patients up till now had HeartMate 3 devices. and around large number also had HeartMate 2 devices, and there is a large experience available at how sort of these therapies help to improve survival in these end stage patients. If we look at the data, HeartMate 3, LBAT 2-year survival, if you look at that, the survival is almost at 2 years, nearing similar to the transplant. Around 82-3% at 2 years in transplant. Of course, this is 2017 figure. It's now 4-5 years past, and we have no better way of managing these patients. But so I think this is almost that these therapy also where transplant is not possible. There is also issue of the organ availability, that these LVAD therapy can be very useful in a long term, giving almost similar kind of survival. I think this is a very important study which came, Momentum 3, 5-year survival data. Basically, it was also to look at the HeartMate 3 and the HeartMate 2 comparison, how that these two devices, how this HeartMate 3 behaves more. And if you look at, these were the two groups. I'll skip over for sake of time. Now, these are the two HeartMate 3, nearly 500 plus patients, and similar number in HeartMate 2. And what you see that in this group, 60% of the patients who went either for HeartMate 3 or for destination therapy. And that shows that this has become now a kind of a alternative to transplant in these patients. And 85% of the patients who went for were Intermax profile 1 to 3 kind of a thing. So they were very sicker patients. And if you look at that hemocompatibility related adverse events with HeartMate 3 and HeartMate 2, and that's what it shows, that HeartMate 3, there was a significant, it's a betterment. I don't know if you can go back to the same slide or not. But anyway, there was a significant improvement, and the adverse events were much less. The thrombotic issue, the embolic issue were much less with HeartMate 3, and that has made it now more attractive. And if you look at the long-term survival also, 54% at 5 years. Of course, HeartMate 2 had less, and similarly for destination therapy patients, 54% at 5 years, and I think 39 or so with the HeartMate 2. So I think the HeartMate 3 technology certainly has taken care of some of the adverse issues which were happening or limitation that we had with the HeartMate 2 device. So now the consensus for 2020 AHA, ACC and Heart Failure Society consensus is that heart patients who are Intermax 1, 2 or 3 kind of thing is a class 1 indication with the level of evidence A, but patients who are little 3 or 4, maybe it again still a level called class of recommendation 1. So these are some of the patients where LVAD now has become a kind of a very useful way of helping these end stage patients. Of course, patients who are sort of sick, they are in shock or very severely sick, they can have some kind of a temporary devices to tide over that phase before you decide that whether they should be going for transplant or they might be going for a long-term LVAD therapy. And large number of patients, I think, are mostly from Intermax 1 and 3 kind of profile. I'd like to share with you these few cases where I had the experience of looking after some of these patients. This was our first patient. I think we had got these HeartMate 4 devices when AIMS immediately after transplant program was started there. And the 4 patients, this was a HeartMate 1 which was implanted. It was in the abdomen, very bulky device, pulsatile. And this was one patient who lived for 2 years. But then he developed with thrombosis, infection, and we couldn't transplant him. I think one of the 4 patients went for transplant. I think then when the HeartMate 2 came, this was in 2015 when I was in Max, and with my colleague, surgical colleague, Dr. Keval, I think we started our HeartMate, the LVAD program, and this was the first case in 2015. This was a young man who was a DCM. He was in a hospital virtually on ventilator. He had ICD before that also. He was very sick. And so in that stage, we shifted to our facility, trying to see what best we can do for him. Of course, he was on different inotropes, intra-aortic balloon. He has to be ventilated for a few days. And I think then we discussed with the family the option was transplant or a LVAD. And transplant technique, I mean, there was an issue of getting a donor so soon, kind of, so they agreed for the device. And so this patient was then taken, I think, on, were on 16th February 2015. This was our first case of LVAD heartbeat 2. And this patient had a little stormy period in the beginning because of arrhythmia, but he settled. And then I think after a few weeks he went home. And this was the CT scan just showing the conduit from, and I think one of the issues that we really faced with a few patients was the tachyarrhythmias in these cases. And this patient also once had I think 40-50 shocks at home from his device. And then he had to be quickly brought to the hospital. Luckily, there was some issue of oversensing, which we programmed. And then after that, so they are a little more prone to arrhythmia. But at the same time, we know that the centrifugal pump, the flow continues even with the arrhythmia, tachyarrhythmias. So I think they do not really, get a time to come to the hospital where you can take care. And this only that time showed us that this continuous flow LVAD, the presence of ICD was not any reduced mortality or high mortality. So I think that's the flow keeps them going. So I think as far as summarizing it, our approach to advanced heart failure today, like patients who are in advanced stage 3 kind of thing, eligible for transplant, you may be waiting for transplant, he can have a LVAD as a bridge to transplant, but those who are not eligible for transplant or not available, I think can have it as a destination therapy. And of course, some patients may even recover. There has been instances where you can take out the device. I think in one of our patients who recovered almost completely, device was taken off. So I think the final message I like to say that is the time is very, very crucial. In these patients, you should not delay. Once you know, I think try to find out the place where this is possible. And I think today in the country we have Professor Balakrishnan here. I think he's one of our pioneers in the field. I feel privileged to be sharing, joining in the session with him today. That these are, now the options are available in few other places and also in the country. And so I think this was the new rule of 3, maybe a repeated hospitalization, increasing use of diuretic, not responding to neurohormonal therapy. I think we should think of, if a patient can afford, send him to a place where this can be done. I think even doing few months earlier may be better than late, because then we may lose the game and we may not be able to help such. Thank you so much for your patience hearing.